We were walking our dog in the park, me, my husband, and Buddy, our golden retriever. That's when a woman from my office, someone I barely speak to, called out, all smiles. She bent down and said, "Hi, Buddy. You're even cuter in person," but I never told her his name or showed her him, and Buddy, he only acts like that with people he knows. That's when everything clicked. My name is Erin Dawson. I'm 34 years old. For most of my life, I've found comfort in order. My closet is organized by color and season, my pantry is labeled, and my career is built on predictable, measurable outcomes. My life felt like a well-organized spreadsheet, stable, secure, and clear. If you knew the inputs, you could predict the outputs. It was a system that worked. Mark, my husband, was the charismatic half of our equation. He was the one who could walk into a room of strangers and leave with 3 new friends. I was the steady one, the anchor. We balanced each other, or so I believed. He brought the chaos, I brought the calm. It was our brand. At the heart of our carefully curated life was Buddy, our golden retriever. He was the uncomplicated joy, the furry, 4-legged constant who didn't need spreadsheets or strategies. His love was a simple, reliable input that always produced the same output, a wagging tail and a wet nose pressed into my hand. The park on a Saturday morning was our ritual. It was a fixed point in the week, a shared coffee, the crisp autumn air, the worn-in comfort of a routine we'd polished over years. I remember that particular morning vividly. The leaves on the maples were a riot of orange and red, and the air had that sharp, clean scent of approaching winter. I held Buddy's leash, its worn leather familiar, in my palm and watched as he joyfully sniffed at a pile of leaves. Mark was walking beside me, telling a funny story from work, his laughter echoing in the cool air. This was my normal. This was the life I'd built carefully, brick by brick, on a foundation of trust and shared history. I believed in that foundation. I had absolutely no reason not to. We were on the far loop of the path, the one that winds down near the creek, when a woman appeared ahead of us, walking in the opposite direction. I recognized her vaguely from the office. Jenna Clark, a junior analyst from the creative department. She was one of dozens of young, ambitious faces I saw at the coffee machine or in all-hands meetings. We'd exchanged polite hellos, maybe a brief nod in the elevator, but that was the extent of it. I wouldn't have expected her to know my name, let alone anything else about me. Before I could even finish placing her, her face broke into a wide, familiar smile, but it wasn't directed at me. It was aimed lower at the golden blur of fur by my knees. "Buddy." "Hey, boy," she called out, her voice bright and confident. The world seemed to go quiet. The birds, the distant traffic, Mark's voice, it all faded into a dull hum. My grip tightened on the leash. Buddy, who is normally shy and reserved with strangers, did something he never does. He pulled, hard. He leaped toward her, his tail wagging in frantic, joyful circles, and started licking her outstretched hands like she was a long-lost member of his pack. He only did that with family. With me, with Mark, with my sister. That was it. The name, Buddy, it echoed in the sudden silence of my mind. How did she know his name? My brain went into overdrive, scanning every file, every memory, every digital footprint. I'd never once mentioned his name at work. It was a small, conscious choice we'd made years ago. My social media is locked down, private, and I've never posted a single picture of him. No tags, no captions, no accidental slips in conversation. It was a fortress of privacy. Mark snapped me out of it, his voice a little too loud, a little too bright. "Hey, Jenna." "Small world, huh?" Jenna laughed, kneeling to scratch Buddy behind the ears, hitting the exact spot that makes his leg thump against the ground. She knew his sweet spot. "I guess so." "I live just a few blocks from here," she said, her explanation breezy and quick. It felt rehearsed. She glanced at me for a single, fleeting second, her eyes not quite meeting mine, before turning her full attention back to my dog. My dog, who was acting like he'd known her his entire life. The walk home was different. The 15 minutes that had felt so comfortable and familiar on the way out were now stretched thin, filled with a heavy, unspoken question. The crisp autumn air now felt cold, and the colorful leaves just looked like dying things. Mark tried to fill the silence, talking about plans for the afternoon, but his words were just noise. I walked beside him, my mind replaying the scene over and over, her voice saying his name, Buddy's ecstatic reaction. Finally, as we turned onto our street, I had to ask. I kept my voice even, casual. That was weird. How did she know Buddy's name? Mark shrugged, his eyes fixed on the house ahead. I don't know, honey. Maybe you mentioned it at some point and forgot, or maybe she's seen us around the neighborhood before. The answers were too fast, too generic. They were placeholder explanations designed to shut down the conversation. This was the first real obstacle. My gut feeling, which was screaming at me that something was deeply wrong, was pitted against his casual, logical dismissal. He was making me feel like I was the one being strange, being paranoid. The moment we got inside, while he was putting away the groceries we'd picked up, I pulled out my phone. I triple-checked everything. My Instagram was still private. My Facebook had no photos of Buddy. I searched my own name, my husband's name, our address, nothing. I specifically recalled a conversation from years ago when we first got Buddy as a puppy. We had agreed not to plaster him all over the internet. It was about privacy, about keeping this one part of our lives just for us. Mark had been the one to suggest it. Let's keep him our little secret, he'd said. A sudden, sharp urge hit me. It was illogical, coming from nowhere, but I couldn't ignore it. I walked into the kitchen and opened the junk drawer, the one filled with old batteries, rubber bands, and takeout menus. In the very back, there was a small white envelope sealed with a piece of Scotch tape. Inside was our spare house key. I picked it up. My goal in that moment became singular and sharp: find out how she knew. This wasn't about confronting her. It wasn't even about confronting Mark yet. It was about confronting the lie that had just followed me home and was now sitting silently in my kitchen. Over the next few days, I became an observer in my own life. I moved through my house, through my marriage, like a detective conducting a quiet, methodical search. I wasn't looking for a fight, I was looking for facts. I was collecting data points, small, seemingly insignificant details that might form a larger picture. On Monday, while loading the dishwasher, I found a coffee mug in the sink that wasn't ours. It was a plain white ceramic mug, the kind you could get anywhere. But when I picked it up to rinse it out, a faint scent rose from the rim. It was floral, sweet, orange blossom. It wasn't my perfume or any of my soaps. I placed it carefully on the counter, a piece of evidence. That night after Mark was asleep, I went back to the junk drawer. I pulled out the small, taped envelope with the spare key. I examined it under the kitchen light. The envelope itself was undisturbed, but the piece of tape holding it shut was creased differently than I remembered. It was slightly off-center, with a faint line down the middle, as if it had been carefully peeled back and then pressed down again. It was a tiny thing, something most people would never notice. But I noticed details. It's what makes me good at my job. The next evening, I sat down at my laptop telling Mark I needed to catch up on some work emails. Instead, I logged into our joint credit card account. I opened the statement and started filtering the transactions. I searched for Uber, I searched for Lyft, and there they were, a series of charges spread out over the last 2 months. Each one was a trip that ended at our address, and they all had one thing in common: they were on Tuesday nights. Tuesday night is my book club. I'm never home. I leave around 7 and I'm not back until after 10. The total came to $612. Each charge was a small, cold, undeniable fact. Then there was Buddy. For the past few weeks, he'd taken to sleeping on the far right cushion of the living room couch. It wasn't my spot, and it wasn't Mark's. He only ever settled there after someone had been sitting in that spot for a long time, warming it up for him. It was someone else's spot. All these things on their own were nothing. A misplaced mug, a creased envelope, some late-night ride shares. But together they were data points on a graph, and they were all trending in the same terrible direction. I decided I had to test him. A direct accusation would just lead to a fight, to more denials. He'd call me crazy, and maybe I was. I needed to see how he'd react to a simple question. So one night while we were making dinner, I brought it up casually. I didn't even look at him, just kept chopping vegetables. Hey, I started, my voice light. I was looking at the credit card statement earlier, saw a bunch of Uber charges on there. Were you having some of the guys over to watch the game on Tuesdays or something? He didn't miss a beat. He didn't even look up from the chicken he was seasoning. No, just work stuff, he said, his tone perfectly normal. Late nights at the office, you know how it is, just easier to grab a car home. The lie was so smooth, so practiced. There was no hesitation, no stumble, no flicker of panic in his eyes. He just delivered the line and moved on. My first tactic, a direct question designed to catch him off guard, had failed completely. And in its failure, it told me everything I needed to know. This wasn't a recent mistake. This wasn't a one-time slip-up. This was a well-managed problem. He had his story straight because he'd had time to perfect it. A strange, cold calm settled over me. The knot of anxiety in my stomach didn't disappear, but it solidified into something hard and heavy. This was no longer about a feeling, about a vague suspicion. This was a project, and I needed a new approach. Asking him directly was pointless. He was a locked door. I needed to find another way in. My options were narrowing, and the path forward was becoming clearer, colder, and lonelier. At work, things were getting intense. I was deep in the final stages of preparation for a massive renewal with our biggest client. The account was worth $2.5 million a year, and the decision-maker, a man named Victor Hale, was famously meticulous. My manager, Olivia Grant, trusted me with it completely. It was my account, my strategy, my win or my loss. I'd spent months on it, building a strategy I was genuinely proud of. It was my world, the part of my life I had built entirely on my own merits. During a team meeting about the renewal, Olivia mentioned that we might need some junior support for the final push, someone to help with market research and data analysis. Before she could even finish her sentence, Mark, who works as a project manager in a completely different department, chimed in. He knew the players on my team, of course, but he rarely got involved in my accounts. Jenna Clark is really sharp, he said to the room. She's eager and she's got a great head for this kind of data. You should tap her. He'd never championed a junior analyst before, ever. It was so out of character that a few heads turned. Olivia, always pragmatic, just nodded. Good suggestion, I'll have her assigned. And just like that, Jenna was added to the periphery of my project team. Suddenly, she was in the hallways more often, in the meetings I was leading. She would give me this bright, innocent smile whenever we passed, a smile that never quite reached her eyes. Her presence, which had started as a nagging question in the park, was no longer just an intrusion into my home. It was now an invasion of my career. The two halves of my life, which I'd always kept so carefully separate, were bleeding into one another. The idea formed in my mind later that night, clear and simple and terrifying. I couldn't get the image of Jenna in my kitchen out of my head. The way she'd move, the things she'd know, I had to see it. I had to see them together in my space. The place they had already violated, a team dinner, it was the perfect cover. I'd host it at our house. A casual get-together for the entire Victor Hale project team, a way to build morale before the final push. No one singled out. No suspicions raised. It would be a team-building exercise, a celebration of all our hard work so far. The next morning, I sent out a group email, my tone cheerful and professional. I used exclamation points. Let's celebrate our progress and gear up for the final presentation, I wrote. Come over for dinner this Friday. Mark saw the email and loved the idea. That's great, Aaron, he said later that evening, wrapping his arms around me from behind as I stood at the kitchen sink. Good for morale, you're always so thoughtful. His chin rested on my shoulder and I had to fight the urge to flinch away from his touch. My smile felt like a mask I was holding up with both hands. For the rest of the week, I prepared. I went to the grocery store, planning a menu of roasted chicken, risotto, and a big salad. I cleaned the house until it gleamed. I bought a few extra bottles of a nice red wine. Every action felt deliberate, precise, like a surgeon preparing their instruments. I wasn't getting ready for a party, I was preparing for an experiment, I was setting a stage. And I just had to wait and watch them walk right into my trap. The night of the dinner party arrived, and the house filled with the warm smells of roasted chicken and garlic. The low hum of my colleagues' light, easy chatter floated from the living room, punctuated by the clink of wine glasses. I moved through the rooms with a glass of Pinot Noir in my hand, playing the role of the gracious, relaxed host. But inside, I felt strangely detached, like a scientist observing a critical experiment through a thick pane of glass. I greeted each person warmly as they arrived, taking their coats, offering them a drink. Mark was in his element, of course. He was the charming host, the funny storyteller, the center of every conversation. But I saw him keep glancing at the front door, a subtle, nervous energy buzzing just beneath his polished surface. I had set little traps, tiny tests that only I would recognize. I'd moved the good wine glasses from their usual cabinet above the dishwasher to a higher, less convenient one on the other side of the kitchen. I'd taken the corkscrew out of the top utensil drawer and hidden it in a deeper drawer filled with dish towels. They were small, insignificant changes, unless, of course, you already knew the layout of the kitchen intimately. Buddy stayed close by my side, his warm body a silent, furry barometer of the truth. He was my only real ally in the room. I was waiting for the final variable to arrive, the catalyst for the whole experiment. My phone buzzed in my pocket. It was a text from my sister, Lauren. "How's it going?" I typed back a one-word lie. "Fine." As I put my phone away, I caught my reflection in the dark glass of the living room window. I saw a smiling woman in a nice sweater, surrounded by friends and colleagues, looking completely and utterly normal. No one could see the gears turning, the cold, calculating focus in my eyes. Jenna arrived 15 minutes late. She swept in with an apology on her lips, not dressed in her usual office attire but in a sleek black dress and heels, her makeup perfect. She looked like she was arriving for a date, not a casual work dinner. The moment she stepped through the door, everything shifted. Buddy, who had been calmly dozing at my feet, shot up and left my side. He barreled toward her, his tail whipping back and forth, a low, excited whine escaping his throat. It was the exact same greeting he gave Mark at the end of every single day. A few of my colleagues noticed. "Wow," one of them said, "your dog really likes her." Jenna just laughed it off, a tinkling, practiced sound. "I guess I'm just a dog person," she said, bending down to fuss over him. Mark's laughter was a fraction too loud, a little too sharp. He hurried over to get her a drink, his movements slightly jerky and unnatural. She handed me a cheap bottle of grocery store wine with a polite, empty smile. "Thanks so much for having me, Erin." As she leaned in, her perfume hit me, orange blossom. The same cloying, sweet scent from the unidentified mug in my sink. The pieces weren't just clicking into place anymore, they were slamming together. I just nodded, my own smile feeling tight on my face. "I'm so glad you could make it," I said. My voice was even, steady. It cost me everything I had to keep it that way. This wasn't just a single data point anymore. This was a constellation of damning details, all burning brightly in my own living room. The social pressure was immense. I had to keep hosting, to keep smiling, to pretend I didn't see the gaping, jagged hole that had just been torn open in the middle of my life. Later, as I was bringing out a platter of appetizers, people were looking for another bottle of wine. Jenna, ever the helpful guest, set her plate down and said, "Oh, I can grab it." This was it. This was the moment I had been waiting for, the reason for this whole elaborate charade. I watched her from the corner of my eye. She walked into my kitchen. She didn't pause, didn't hesitate, didn't ask where anything was. She went straight to the cabinet on the far side of the room, the wrong cabinet, the one I had moved the good wine stems to that very morning. She opened it without a second thought and pulled one out. She moved through my kitchen with the easy, unthinking confidence of someone who belonged there. Then she went for the corkscrew. She didn't even try the main utensil drawer. Her hand went directly to the lower drawer, the one with the dish towels, and rummaged for a second before pulling it out. First try, My manager Olivia was standing near the kitchen island and saw the whole thing. She's observant, just like me. She gave me a quick, questioning look, her eyebrows raised just slightly. I gave a tiny, almost imperceptible shake of my head, a silent signal to let it go, not now. Across the room, Mark was in the middle of a loud, boisterous story, his back to the kitchen, but he must have felt my eyes on him. He glanced over, saw me watching Jenna, and his face flushed a deep red. He looked away instantly. The problem was so much wider than an affair now. It was an invasion. This was a woman who had made herself comfortable in my home, in my life, completely behind my back. The feeling of vulnerability was overwhelming. My most private space, my sanctuary, had been compromised. The stakes had just been raised from my marriage to my sanity. The rest of the dinner passed in a blur of polite conversation and the scrape of forks on plates. I was on autopilot, my mind a million miles away, cataloging every detail. I watched the small, almost invisible interactions between them, a shared glance across the table that lingered a second too long. His hand brushing against the small of her back as he passed behind her chair to refill someone's water glass. No one else seemed to notice a thing, but to me, it was like they were standing under a harsh, white spotlight. When people finally started to leave, gathering their coats and offering their thanks, Jenna came up to me, her smile as bright and false as ever. "Your home is beautiful, Erin. You have wonderful taste." The sheer audacity of it left me breathless. Mark walked her to the door. I saw them from the living room, framed in the foyer. He murmured something to her, his head bent close to hers before she finally slipped out into the night. After the last guest had departed, the house fell silent. The silence was heavy, accusatory. Mark started clearing plates from the coffee table, bustling around with a forced energy, deliberately avoiding my gaze. "That went well, don't you think?" he finally said, his voice straining for normalcy. I didn't answer. I just stood in the middle of the living room, my arms crossed, and waited. The air was thick with everything that hadn't been said. He eventually stopped what he was doing and turned to look at me. He saw the expression on my face, the cold, quiet certainty in my eyes, and his own cheerful mask finally faltered. His smile faded. He knew that I knew. There was no shouted accusation, no tearful breakdown, just a silent, devastating confrontation. In that moment, he knew the game was up. Sleep was impossible after the party. Mark didn't even try to come to our bedroom. He took a pillow and a blanket and went to the guest room, a silent admission of guilt that was louder than any confession. I lay in our bed alone, staring up at the dark ceiling, replaying every single detail of the evening. Jenna's confident stride into my kitchen, Mark's nervous, over-the-top laughter, the scent of her perfume lingering in the entryway. The emotional pain was there, a deep, hollow ache in my chest. But it was buried underneath a layer of something else, something cold and hard and sharp. Anger. I realized, lying there in the dark, that I didn't want an apology. I didn't want a tearful confession scene in the living room. I wanted control. My mind drifted back to my childhood, to the heavy silence in our house after Dad's secrets started to surface. I remember watching my mom shrink day by day. She became smaller, quieter, trying to hold our fractured family together with desperate hope and willful denial. She pretended not to see what was right in front of her, because seeing it would have meant dismantling her entire world. I would not be her. I refused to be the woman who pretends for the sake of peace. I would not shrink. I needed proof, not for my own validation. The dinner party had given me that. I needed proof that was cold, hard, and undeniable to others. My thinking shifted. This was no longer a marriage problem to be solved with therapy and long talks. This was a logistics problem to be managed. I had to know exactly how deep this went, and I couldn't rely on a single word out of Mark's mouth to tell me. The next morning, I drove to a tech store in the next town over. I walked through the aisles of sleek gadgets until I found what I was looking for, a small, discreet security camera designed to look like a phone charger. It was perfect. Small enough to be invisible, powerful enough to give me what I needed. That evening, I put the next phase of my plan into motion. I told Mark I had a very early client breakfast the following morning all the way across town. I think I'm just going to stay at Lauren's place tonight, I said, keeping my voice casual. It'll be easier than fighting rush hour traffic. Yeah, good idea, he said, his relief so palpable it was almost sickening. You need your rest for the big meeting. He agreed way too quickly. My next call was to my neighbor, Nate Collins, a quiet retiree who absolutely adored Buddy. I asked if he could possibly watch him for just one night. Of course, Aaron, he said warmly. Anything you need, Buddy is always welcome. I packed a small overnight bag, making sure Mark saw me do it. A change of clothes, my toothbrush, my laptop. It had to look completely convincing. Before I left, while Mark was in the shower, I went into the living room. I plugged the camera into an outlet behind a large potted plant. It was aimed perfectly with a clear, wide view of the front door, the foyer, and the entrance to the kitchen. I set it to record video only, no audio. I wasn't interested in breaking any laws, I just needed timestamps and visuals, evidence. I dropped Buddy off at Nate's, giving him one last hug. Walking out of my own house that night, closing the door behind me, felt final. I wasn't just leaving for the night. I was leaving my old life behind. I was burning the bridge myself. I didn't go to my sister's. I couldn't involve her, not yet. Instead, I checked into a cheap, anonymous motel a few towns over. The room smelled of stale smoke and bleach, but I barely noticed. I opened my laptop, connected to the spotty motel Wi-Fi, and pulled up the live feed from the camera. For hours, the house was dark and empty. The only movement was the sweep of headlights across the living room wall as cars passed by. I watched, my heart a slow, heavy drum in my chest. Then, at 9:43 p.m., the feed flickered to life. The front door opened. Mark walked in, and right behind him was Jenna. My heart hammered against my ribs, but my hand was steady on the mouse as I hit the record button. I watched as she stepped inside and pulled a key from her pocket. A key. She placed it on the small entryway table with a familiar click. It was a copy of my house key. She walked past Mark and headed straight for the kitchen, her movements fluid and confident. She'd done this 1,000 times. She wasn't a guest being welcomed into my home. She was a resident, arriving for the evening. I took a series of high-resolution, time-stamped screenshots. Mark bringing her through the front door, Jenna placing her key on the table, her walking freely through my home as if she owned the place. This was it, the first piece of undeniable, objective proof, the kind of proof you can't argue with or explain away. But then I saw something that made the blood run cold in my veins. On the kitchen counter, I had deliberately left a document. It was a printed outline of my strategy for the upcoming Victor Hale renewal pitch. My strategy, my work. On the camera feed, I watched as Jenna walked over to it. She picked up the stack of papers. She ran a finger down the page, her head tilted as she read. She wasn't just glancing at it, she was studying it. She spent a full 2 minutes with that document in her hands before setting it back down exactly where she'd found it. A new kind of fury, cold and sharp and clean, cut through the personal pain of the affair. This wasn't just about my husband and my home anymore. This was about my work, my career, my future. I didn't sleep. I got up at 5 in the morning and drove home, letting myself into the still dark house before Mark was even awake. The air felt tainted, foreign. I went straight to my laptop and opened my work email, and there it was. An email from Jenna sent to a third-party research vendor at 11:17 p.m. last night. In it, she was pitching a new idea she wanted them to explore for the Hale account. And she used a specific, unique phrase I had crafted myself, a phrase from the top of my outline, strategic narrative integration. She had lifted it directly from my document, word for word. This was the real reveal. The affair wasn't the disease, it was the symptom. It was a Trojan horse she had used to get inside my life. She wasn't just sleeping with my husband. She was trying to steal my career right out from under me. And my plan, which had been about simply getting them out of my house, had to change. It had to get bigger. It had to be about getting her out of my company. staring at Jenna's email on one screen and the time-stamped camera footage on another, everything crystallized. The pieces didn't just fit, they locked together into a single, ugly picture. The major truth wasn't that Mark was a cheater. I'd spent the last week confirming that. The real, fundamental truth was that I had been targeted. My home, my marriage, my husband, they were just the access points. The real target had always been my job, the affair, the lies, the secret key. It all felt almost secondary now. It was a symptom of a much larger, more calculated betrayal. Jenna didn't just stumble into an affair with a married man. She saw an opportunity. She used my husband to get access to my life and through my life to my work. And Mark, he wasn't just weak or foolish. He was a willing accomplice. He let her in. He unlocked the door and invited the threat right into our home. He probably bragged about my work, about the big renewal, giving her the opening she needed to sink her teeth in. A wave of disgust washed over me, but it was a clean feeling, not a messy one. It was pure, cold fuel. The pain was still there, a dull ache beneath my ribs, but it was no longer a weakness. The pain was a tool now. The evidence was a weapon. My silence had been my shield while I gathered information, but my action would be my sword. I refused to be a casualty in my own life story. I would not be collateral damage in their grubby little power play. I closed the email and the video feed. I opened a new, blank document on my computer. At the top of the page, I typed 2 words, action plan. The choice was made. It was clear, simple, and absolute. There would be no dramatic confrontation. There would be no screaming match in the living room. There would be no couples therapy, no tearful attempts at reconciliation. I was not interested in saving my marriage. I was interested in executing a controlled demolition. I was exiting. I was not going to get revenge in a messy fit of rage. I was going to execute a strategy for containment and removal. This decision felt completely and totally irreversible. The moment I set the first step in motion, my life with Mark, the life I had known for a decade, would be over for good. There was no hesitation. I picked up my phone and called my bank's customer service line. I calmly asked about the procedure for freezing a joint account. I took notes. I opened another browser tab and searched for a 24-hour locksmith in my area, saving the number to my contacts. Then I sent a text message to my sister, Lauren. I need you. Can you come over tonight? Don't tell Mark. Her reply came back instantly. On my way. Every step felt logical, necessary, and right. This was the most sane, the most clear-headed I'd felt in weeks. Later that afternoon, after I knew Mark had left for work, I walked through my house, room by room. It felt like a museum of a life that was no longer mine. The wedding photos on the mantelpiece, his and my smiling faces looking out from silver frames. The big, comfortable couch we'd spent weeks picking out together. The whole life we had built, brick by brick. I had to accept the personal cost of what I was about to do. This was going to hurt. It would be lonely. There would be mountains of paperwork and awkward, painful conversations with family and friends. I was choosing to dismantle a decade of my life, and that would leave a scar. But the cost of staying was so much higher. The cost of staying was my self-respect. It was my professional integrity. It was my peace of mind. Staying meant living with a man who saw me not as his partner, but as a resource to be plundered for the benefit of his new girlfriend. Staying meant walking into work every day and sitting in meetings with a woman who saw me as an obstacle to be removed. I knew the grief would come later, and I decided to make space for it then. For now, there was only the plan. I walked over to the mantelpiece, picked up our largest wedding photo, and without looking at it, carried it into the bedroom. I opened a drawer, placed it face down inside, and closed it. It was the first step. The first brick pulled from the wall. My goal had changed. It wasn't just to prove them wrong or to expose a lie. I had the proof. What I didn't have was control yet. So I wrote the plan down in plain language, a list with 3 items that felt like a lifeline. First, secure the house. If he was going to treat our home like a revolving door, I was going to take possession of it, fast and clean. Change the locks, put his things out by the door, no drama. Second, neutralize the professional threat. Jenna had to be removed from my account and the company had to know she had used my materials without permission. I would bring evidence, time-stamped and specific, and I would let the company handle it through their channels. I didn't want a messy public fight, I wanted formal, undeniable consequences. Third, protect my career. I had 1 week until the renewal presentation with Victor Hale. I couldn't let rumors or leaks cost me that account. I had to lock down the narrative and deliver something no one could argue with. These goals felt surgical. They weren't powered by fury, they were powered by logic. My silence up to now hadn't been weakness, it had been strategy. There was no revenge in the way most people imagine it, no dramatic scenes or confrontations in the street. My goal was containment, correction, and reclamation. I would secure what was mine, remove the parasites, and rebuild. If that meant walking away from the life I'd built with Mark, then so be it. I was ready to trade the comfort of pretending for the clarity of boundaries. The next morning, I scheduled a private meeting with Olivia. Walking down the hallway to her office, I rehearsed in my head the exact words I would use. I didn't want this to be about me as a betrayed wife, I wanted it to be about a breach of professional trust. Olivia's office was quiet, the kind of neat, intentional quiet that felt safe. She closed the door behind me and sat down, folding her hands in that steady way that always made me feel like someone was finally listening. I started calm. I have a sensitive issue with the Hale account, I said. It involves potential misconduct and the unauthorized use of proprietary materials. I handed her a printout of Jenna's email to the vendor and then, without dramatic flourish, showed her the screenshots from the camera, Jenna placing a key on our entry table, Jenna handling my printed outline. Olivia took them in, her expression unreadable for a beat, then thoughtful. "Do you have timestamps?" she asked, not accusing, just precise. "Yes," I said, "they're time-stamped and time-coded. I recorded video only, no audio." I left the outline where anyone could see it, deliberately. Jenna accessed it and then emailed those ideas to a third party. I explained the rideshare charges, the mug, the spare key, all the small things that had formed a pattern. Olivia listened, occasionally glancing at the evidence, then nodded. She didn't offer pats on the shoulder or questions meant to pry into my private life. She offered a plan. "Thank you for bringing this so professionally," she said. "This is a possible breach of confidentiality and may affect the Hale renewal. You did the right thing collecting evidence. We need to take this to human resources immediately. I'll support you through it." Her voice was calm, and in that moment I felt less alone. I wasn't just a woman whose marriage had failed, I was a trusted account manager with real risks to manage. Olivia stood, offering a small, firm hand squeeze. "We'll handle it the right way," she said. "Get me whatever else you have and I'll walk with you." Olivia walked the short distance to human resources with me. The HR office smelled faintly of coffee and printer toner, neutral as a hospital room. Maya Brooks, our representative, greeted us and ushered us into a private meeting room. I kept my tone factual and clipped as I laid out the sequence. The encounter in the park, the dinners, the dinner party, the camera footage, the email, the exact phrase Jenna had stolen. I handed Maya a folder, printed screenshots, the rideshare charges, a written statement detailing the times and the actions I had observed. I didn't mention Mark's name except where it was unavoidable context. This complaint was about Jenna's unauthorized access and the misuse of company materials. Maya listened, flipping through the pages with a practiced calm. "We take this very seriously," she said, and I believed her. She explained, plainly and simply, what would happen next. A formal investigation, temporary removal of Jenna from the account, and limiting her access to sensitive materials during the inquiry. "We will suspend network access and restrict her use of client files pending the outcome," she said. I nodded. I didn't want to hear legal language, I wanted action, and her words felt like action. She placed a small form on the table and asked me to write a brief statement. I wrote it the way I had rehearsed, factual, unemotional, specific. On November 8 at approximately 9:43 p.m., Jenna Clark entered my home with a copy of our house key. She handled and reviewed a printed outline of the Victor Hale renewal and later sent an email to a third-party vendor containing phrasing identical to my document. I am submitting timestamped video screenshots and transaction records of rideshare charges to our address on Tuesday nights. I signed it. Maya stamped the folder and said she would begin a formal inquiry immediately. She also asked if I wanted the complaint to be handled quietly, to which I answered yes. I wanted process, not spectacle. Olivia stayed for the whole thing, an anchor in the sterile room. Before we left, Maya said one thing that mattered the most. We will remove Jenna from the Hale account immediately and place her on administrative leave pending investigation. It wasn't dramatic, but it was decisive. The company had begun to close ranks the way I needed it to. I left HR with a thin warmth in my chest, the sense of a task being executed. The first domino had fallen. By late afternoon, I was back at home arranging the next phase. I had called a locksmith earlier and he'd said he could come within a few hours. While I waited, I contacted the bank. I transferred $1,200 into my personal account, my contribution for the last 2 weeks' bills, and then I called customer service and asked them in plain terms to freeze the joint account. I didn't want to hear any procedures or policies. I wanted a fact that money would not vanish in the night and that Mark couldn't drain what I needed. When the locksmith arrived, he was all business, practical hands, a soft voice. He worked quickly, the clack of tools and the quiet scraping of metal filling the kitchen like rain. I stood nearby, watching him, my chest a steady stone of purpose. Lauren was there too, moving around the house with that practical quiet she always had. She helped me pack a small bag for Mark without a word of judgment. Socks, a few shirts, his favorite hoodie. She folded things neatly like she was preparing a care package rather than an eviction. The sight of Lauren doing this steadied me. I wasn't alone. We set his packed bag by the front door outside the new lock's reach. I left it visible on the porch, not hidden, a simple fact-based message: your things are here. The locksmith finished, tested the new lock, and handed me a small plastic key. It felt good and ridiculous in my palm. It was both symbolic and useful. I put it in the chain with my usual keys, then texted Mark a short, formal email I had drafted on my laptop. Subject: next steps, body, the locks have been changed, your bag is outside. I have deposited your half of the last 2 weeks' bills into the joint account. The joint account is being frozen. Buddy is staying with me. All future communication must be in writing. I didn't add a single flourish. No accusations, no attempts to justify. It was a list of facts and boundaries. I hit send and felt the small thrill of control. He called twice in the next hour. I let it go to voicemail. The messages were a shaky mix of anger and pleading. They didn't change anything. Later that evening, as the sun slid low and the house settled into a new kind of quiet, I moved Buddy's bed back to my side of the bedroom. The dog rolled onto his back, paws in the air, blissful and unconcerned. He had no idea what had changed, only that his human was present and calm. I sat down on the edge of the bed and let myself feel the strange, complicated relief that came with putting the locks on. This was no longer a life under negotiation. It was one I had reclaimed, step by step, with evidence and patience and a refusal to be small again. That evening, when Mark first tried his old key in the lock, I watched the live feed from my laptop like it was a slow, awful movie. He stood on the porch, fumbling with the key, breath fogging in the chill air. He tried again, harder this time, and the key slipped in his hand. He cursed under his breath and pressed his shoulder to the door like he expected it to open anyway. The new deadbolt turned smoothly, then caught. He muttered, shoved the key back into his pocket, and knocked like a stranger. His first phone call came a minute later. He was frantic, voice high with that old charm turning ragged. "Aaron, what's going on? Why would you?" I let it go to voicemail. I didn't want him to hear me breathe, to hear the steadiness in my voice. I let him make his case to the empty line. When he didn't get an answer, the texts started, a steady stream of trying to reclaim a narrative he no longer controlled. "What the hell, Aaron? My key isn't working. Are you there? This isn't funny. Did you change the locks? Are you insane? If this is about Jenna, we can talk. It wasn't what you think. I miss you. Please, let's not do something we'll regret." At first the messages were angry, then pleading, then small confessions squeezed between insults. "Okay, I let her in a couple times," one read, "but it wasn't, look, it didn't mean anything like you're making it." Another, "I grabbed some of your drafts to help her. I thought it was okay." He was trying to spin meaning from half admissions to soften his role by making it sound like he was doing favors, not betraying me. It was a tactic. He wanted me to negotiate. He wanted me to argue in the open, to be human and messy, and to beg him to stay. I didn't reply right away. I opened the email draft I had prepared and pasted it into my reply box. No drama, no accusations. Just facts and boundaries. Subject, next steps, body, your bag is outside, the locks are changed, all further contact must be in writing, I have deposited your half of the funds, our joint account is frozen. Buddy is staying with me? I hit send and felt something shift. My finger didn't tremble, my voice didn't rise, the power wasn't in his apology or in his manipulation anymore. It was in the new reality, in the locks and the email and the way the house no longer belonged to him. He called again, and again I let it go to voicemail. His messages moved from rage to bargaining, then to a sliver of confession, and finally to thin threats about what he'd tell people. None of it changed the fact of the screenshots, the time-stamped footage, the email he couldn't unsend. When the texts and calls tapered off, silence settled over the house like a weight that was, remarkably, also relief. Buddy padded in from the backyard and nosed my hand. He didn't understand the details, he just knew I was still here. I put my laptop away, stood, and for the first time in days allowed myself to exhale. At work, the HR investigation hit the floor like a quiet bomb. Jenna was suspended the same afternoon Maya had assured me she would be. The company moved in that procedural way that looks calm on the surface but shifts things under the skin. Key cards deactivated, project access revoked. A notice written in neutral language circulating through middle managers that personnel changes were being made on the Victor Hale account. The office buzzed, people clustered in small groups, hands over coffee cups, whispering. Some of the whispers were sympathetic. A few people stopped me in the hallway, eyes soft, and offered small condolences. "I'm so sorry, Aaron," they'd say, like it was a personal loss they could almost name. Others watched me with a guarded curiosity, like I might break if touched. A rumor always wants a face and a simple story, so some folks folded mine into the pile of "poor woman cheated on." It was easier for them to see me as a betrayed wife than as a wronged professional. That made sense. People liked the neat narratives, love triangle, bad decisions, messy feelings. Mark, not having his usual leverage, started his own campaign of narrative control. I heard, through office grapevine and from people who felt awkward about being put in the middle, that he was telling his version, that I'd had a meltdown, that I was overreacting, that I was unstable and letting personal feelings contaminate the account. A few colleagues started casting sidelong glances in meetings, a flicker of doubt there that I could feel like static on my skin. Olivia became my dam. She shut down speculation during team meetings like a woman closing windows in a storm. "Aaron's focus is on the Hale renewal," she'd say, flat and firm. "So is ours." She redirected conversations, reassigned any gossiping hands back to work, and refused to let the rumor train pick up speed on our team. I watched her do it and felt grateful and a little stunned. Olivia's support wasn't sentimental, it was administrative and powerful. She protected the work from the noise and, by extension, protected me, but protection wasn't total. People talked. The client, Victor Hale, had heard there were internal changes, and that was the kind of phrase his assistant would elevate into concern. Even subtle unease on the client's end was dangerous with a renewal that large. Every comment that slid under my door, every sideways look, tightened the band around my chest. My reputation for steady, unemotional leadership seemed suddenly fragile in the face of a whisper campaign fueled by my husband. A week into the investigation, Maya called me in for a follow-up. I sat across from her again in the HR office, the same neutral carpet and coffee machine hum. She didn't bother with small talk. During our forensic review of company systems, she said, we found an email chain between Jenna Clark and Mark Turner going back 6 months. The words landed like bricks. 6 months. Not a couple of rideshares, not a few nights. 6 months of forwarded updates, my draft presentations, internal notes. He'd used his access to send my documents to Jenna piece by piece. He had been feeding her my work so she could appropriate it, refine it, and present it to others as her own. I remember the room narrowing around me, the carpet pattern tilting. My first reaction was pure, clear fury, hot, bright, a flare that made my hands shake. Then the shame came, quick and stupid, the kind that wants to blame the betrayed for not seeing sooner. But the shame didn't stick. I thought of the spare key in the drawer, of the creased tape, of the mug that smelled of orange blossom, and the shame slid off like water. Maya explained it in simple terms so there could be no misinterpretation. He used his project access to pull files and forward them, she said. We have the server logs and the email copies. This is not an accident. It appears deliberate. Her voice was not triumphant. It was clinical. That made the betrayal feel even colder, deliberate, calculated. They found forwards and replies time-stamped late at night, messages where he'd written, she'll love this section or pass this on to Jenna. The paper trail was ugly and uncomplicated. It wasn't the messy, one-night lapse of judgment I had sometimes imagined for people who cheat. This was strategy. Mark had been participating in a long game. I sat there and let each new fact be named. I didn't try to make excuses for him in my head. I didn't search for reasons to soften it. The decision he'd made was clear. The choice he made to help a colleague steal from me, to let a stranger into our life and fleece me professionally, had been a sustained act. The personal betrayal bled into professional sabotage. There was no coming back from that. When I left HR, the air outside felt thinner, sharper. The office was the same as always, desks, hum of printers, people moving through like a school of fish, but everything I touched had been rearranged by knowledge. I walked back to my desk like a woman reading a map she hadn't known she was holding. Each step felt purposeful. There was anger, yes, but it was a tool. It focused me. Then Olivia pulled me into her office and she didn't hesitate. Victor's assistant called, she said without preamble. They heard there was internal restructuring on our account. They want reassurance before the upcoming presentation. My stomach dropped. The renewal meeting was on the calendar for 1 week out. This wasn't a rumor that would blow over. For a client like Victor Hale, any sign of instability was a reason to cancel and seek another firm. In their world, risk aversion wasn't a trait, it's a survival method. If he smelled chaos, he'd withdraw. We need you to go see him, Olivia said. In person, now, don't tell him the details, tell him the team and the work are intact. Show him the strategy, show him the numbers. It was the kind of task that flipped my blood into a fighting rhythm. Go to the client, diffuse the narrative, and make the work so undeniable that the chatter couldn't touch it. It was also a risk. A surprise meeting could seem defensive if done wrong. It could make the rumors look real, but Olivia was right. If I let the rumor exist without contest, it would grow. The ticking clock suddenly sounded audible, the calendar merciless, the plane tickets already a choice. I thought of all the late nights I spent building the Hale pitch, the architecture of the campaign in my head. I thought about how Jenna had tried to take what was mine and present it as a slight theft. I thought about Mark's smugness when he forwarded files. I felt the anger surge again, but steadier this time, harnessed into a plan. There was no time for paralysis. I booked a flight that night. I rewrote parts of the pitch to be sharper, bolder, not defensive but commanding. I would not mention the affair or the investigation. I would not explain myself. I would present a solution so clean and valuable that it would make any whisper of internal mess look ridiculous. I told myself over and over, show up, control the narrative, deliver value. The account was my lifeline and I was going to hang on to it with everything I had. I felt completely cornered. If I did nothing, the account could slip away because of gossip. If I reacted the wrong way, I could spook the client and make any rumor look true. There was no margin for error. The safe, methodical plan I'd started with, collect evidence, involve human resources, secure the home, had to expand. It had to include controlling the narrative outside the walls of the office. The renewal with Victor Hale wasn't just a line on a spreadsheet. It was the proof that my work couldn't be taken from me, no matter who whispered behind closed doors. So I decided to go to him in person, not for excuses, not to ask for pity, not to explain my life. I would show up, own the work, and make the account's future so clear and compelling that the rumors would become irrelevant. I rewrote parts of the pitch to be sharper and more valuable than anything I'd done before. I folded in new projections, tighter timelines, a campaign structure that linked story and measurement in a way that would make the results obvious. I would use the phrase strategic narrative integration, the very phrase Jenna had lifted, but I'd own it, expand it, and lock it to outcomes no one could argue with. Olivia backed me. "Go see him," she said, steady and blunt. "Don't litigate, demonstrate." Her voice was the kind that made things happen. Meyer and HR continued the investigation and Jenna was suspended, but that didn't change the ticking clock. I booked a flight for the next morning. I told no one besides Lauren and Nate where I was going. Pack light, be bright, be unshakable. When the plane took off, the city shrank below me in blocks and highways and tiny suburban lights. I thought of how quietly everything had slipped, the spare key, the rideshare receipts, the orange blossom mug, and how loudly I would fight back, not with noise but with a clearer plan. I told myself over and over that control wasn't revenge, it was reclaiming what I had built. This had to be a surgical move, no drama, no pleas, just the work and the evidence that the work belonged to me. The night before the meeting, I was in a cheap, impersonal hotel room 500 miles from home. The air conditioner hummed like a distracted insect. My notes were spread across the small desk, a scatter of bullet points and charts and rehearsal lines. I ran the presentation 100 ways, the words catching and smoothing in my mouth. Sleep felt like an indulgence I couldn't afford. Then an email appeared in my personal inbox with the subject line, "Don't do this, Aaron." It was from Mark. He didn't open with apology. He opened with memory, our first apartment, the night we brought Buddy home, Dad's funeral, and a string of small, intimate images meant to tie my heart to him again. He closed with a question that was supposed to be murderous. "Is this what Mom would have wanted, to end up alone because you can't forgive one mistake?" He'd learned how to push my soft spots. The mention of Mom and Dad landed like a physical ache. I remembered Mom shrinking into herself at our kitchen table, pretending to believe whatever story kept the house standing. I remembered Dad's hush, the secrets that slid through our family like slow poison. Mark was trying to frame me as the one who would repeat those mistakes, this time by walking away. He wanted me to feel like I was betraying my own family history. For a few excruciating minutes, self-doubt crept in. What if walking away did look like giving up? What if I was cutting my life into sharp pieces that would never heal? Then Lauren's words returned to me, "He's telling you about himself," and the idea collapsed under its own weight. Mark's strategy had always been to make me the unstable one, to trade my steadiness for melodrama. I deleted his email. I didn't reply. I turned my phone off. The hotel room was suddenly very quiet except for the tiny tick of air and the sharp, steady beating in my own chest. I let myself breathe, let the anger burn into something practical. Later, when the exhaustion hit, I called Lauren. My voice broke on the first word. She listened without fixes and without platitudes. "You're not a monster," she said. "You're a person who built something honest. You're doing it in the right way." Her calm steadied me. She told me a story about Mom that made me laugh through the salt in my throat. Mom once locked herself out of the car because she refused to call Dad and admit she'd made a mistake. "She didn't need him for every little thing," Lauren said. "You won't either." That night I lay awake and rehearsed the opening line I would use in front of Victor Hale. Direct communication is how we keep trust. It wasn't a defensive line, it was a promise. I imagined his office, glass, oak, the kind of place where people make decisions with a hard breath, and practiced how I would move the conversation from rumor to strategy. When sleep finally came, it was the sleep of someone who decided to act, not react. The next morning I stood in Victor Hale's lobby, coffee in a paper cup that had gone lukewarm in my hands. He was older than I expected, with a face that didn't do easy things like smile. He gestured for me to sit and then, before the pleasantries, said, "Aaron, I was surprised to hear from you. I've been hearing some unsettling things about your agency." He didn't try to soften the question. He put it out there, the way a man who makes big decisions does, short, concrete, no drama. I met his gaze and didn't flinch. "That's why I'm here, Victor," I said. "I believe in direct communication. There was an internal staffing change on your account. It was handled swiftly and professionally to protect the integrity of your work. My focus, as always, is on the results we deliver for you." I didn't offer a diary of my private life or plead for understanding. I framed the situation as a business fact, then I pivoted. "But that's not the main reason I came," I said. "I had a new idea for the third quarter that I felt was too important to wait for our formal presentation." I opened my laptop and the whole room narrowed to the slide deck. A clean, fierce architecture of story, channels, timing, and outcomes. The next part of the meeting would either be about rumors or about strategy. I had come to make sure it was the latter. I opened my laptop and launched into the deck like I was meeting an old friend. The slides were clean, no fluff, just a clear line from insight to action. I started with the market read. What customers were thinking right now, where competitors were vulnerable, and the 3 big moments next quarter that we could own. Then I folded in the work I'd already done on strategic narrative integration and expanded it, showing how a single story thread could run across paid media, owned channels, and live events so that every dollar spent built on the last. I used simple examples, numbers that could be tracked, and a timeline that made the results feel inevitable. Victor watched the whole thing the way a judge watches a case, eyes steady, no blink wasted. He asked sharp questions about metrics and audience overlap, about staffing and timelines. I answered without flinch, offering specifics, 2-week pilots, clear success measures, a commitment to start small and scale fast if the signals were right. I didn't rant about fidelity or ownership. I reclaimed my ideas by making them better, live, measurable, and impossible to reduce to the stolen sentence Jenna had emailed that vendor. When I hit the ROI slide, I saw his posture shift. He leaned forward, fingers together like a clasp. "How soon do you think we can move?" he asked. I walked him through a phased rollout and the expected bump in engagement and conversions. He asked for references and a tighter risk mitigation plan, not because he wanted to be mean, but because that was his job. I gave him both. The meeting turned into a working session, the nervous rumor about internal restructuring dissolving with every solid answer I offered. By the time I closed my laptop, Victor's tone had changed from cautious to impressed. "This is clearly yours, Aaron," he said. "You understand our customers better than anyone I've seen. Send me the proposal and the contract. 2 years. Let's extend." I felt a lightness so profound it surprised me, a release that came from being seen for my work, not for the drama around it. I left his office with the renewal essentially in hand, the rumor now a footnote beside a clear plan and a signed intent. The flight home felt different. I texted Lauren, "We did it." She replied with a string of cheering emojis and one word, pride. When I walked through my front door, Buddy barreled into my legs like he'd been waiting for the exact shape of me. He sprawled, gave a happy grunt, and then sat up to inspect my face as if checking the weather of my heart. I loved him for that uncomplicated, unconditional checkup. That afternoon, I turned my phone back on fully. There was a single text from Mark, "We need to talk." I saw his car across the street, an older sedan parked under the maple, and for a second the old reflex rose, opened the door, let him in, do the heavy lifting of feelings. But something in me had shifted. I had spent weeks collecting facts, moving deliberately, and I had won on my terms. I didn't owe him a scene. I didn't owe him an explanation. I watched him approach the front walk and then stopped moving. He stood at my front door and knocked like someone who wanted to be let in for comfort, not to be held accountable. I watched him on the porch through the living room window. He looked smaller than I remembered, shoulders hunched in a way that made him seem less like the man who'd once charmed a room and more like someone with nothing left to say. He rang the bell once, twice. When no one answered, he called. He watched the door, shifting his weight like he might disappear into the street. He walked away 5 minutes later. I watched him go down the sidewalk and then kept watching until the maple blocked him from view. I didn't feel triumphant in the way people imagine triumph. I felt something quieter, a firm, unshakable peace. I had done the hard, precise work. I had not given up my dignity or my career for a fight. I poured myself a glass of wine and sat down at the kitchen table where the sunlight had shifted across the grain. It felt good to be home in the way homes are supposed to feel: safe, private, mine. The next morning, Human Resources called. "We've concluded our investigation," the voice said, calm and official. The woman on the phone outlined the findings without melodrama. Jenna Clark had been terminated for gross misconduct related to unauthorized access and misuse of company materials. Mark Turner had submitted his resignation, effective immediately. He'd seen the evidence in the Human Resources file, the person said, and chose to step down. I felt a strange lack of fireworks when the words landed. There was no gloating joy. Just a slow, clean relief, like a pressure valve finally opening. I sat with that relief for a long time. I thought about how I used to imagine confrontation, shouting, dramatic scenes, vindication. None of that had played out. Instead, meticulous work, quiet patience, and evidence had done the heavy lifting. I had proven my value with my work, protected my career, and reclaimed my home. That was enough. I took the cheap wine glass from the set we'd bought together, one of those small, ordinary things that carried 1,000 tiny memories. I held it up and thought about how easily we had fit a life into the shape of that little ritual. Then I dropped it into the trash can. The sound of the glass shattering was loud and clean, a small punctuation mark. In some private place, something unclenched. With Jenna gone and Mark out of the company, the immediate threats were gone. But the long work remained: the divorce paperwork, the logistical severing, the slow, awkward conversations with friends and in-laws. I did those things with the same practical focus I'd used to gather evidence. I signed papers, shifted utilities, updated addresses. I listened to my sister and to Nate and to Lauren when I needed the soft, steady presence of other people. Their support wasn't dramatic either. It was consistent and ordinary in the way that matters most. Winning hadn't made the costs disappear. The house felt lighter, but there were spaces that felt hollow. The other side of the closet, the empty spot in the driveway, the toothbrush I moved back into my drawer alone, these were small, persistent wounds. There were nights I lay awake and the silence felt like a weight. Sometimes I cried in the shower, feeling the grief of what I had lost and the shame-free relief of what I had saved. A month later, the house felt different in ways both simple and significant. I moved the couch to catch the morning sun. I bought a set of wine glasses for $64 and placed them neatly in the cabinet. The purchase felt monumental and small at once. I put Buddy's bed beside mine, a deliberate choice that made my bedroom feel less empty at night. In the mornings, I wake before dawn and take him for a walk. The world is quiet and honest then, the way it was when we first moved into the house and believed in the simple elements of our life. At work, things shifted too. Olivia gave me more responsibility and more visibility. The renewal with Victor Hale turned into a 2-year extension and a case study that other teams wanted to learn from. People who had whispered started to nod in meetings, including some who had been skeptical before. But that didn't matter as much as the steady confidence I felt walking into the office each day. I was no longer just steady Erin. I was someone who had protected her work and her life with an unflashy kind of courage. The costs were visible. There were nights when I opened the closet and felt for the place where another person used to hang his coat. The driveway had one less car. The divorce paperwork sat on my desk like a quiet, bureaucratic tombstone to the life we'd dismantled. I stared at it sometimes, then closed the file drawer and made coffee. I let myself feel the sadness and I didn't rush to fix it. Grief deserved time. Mark moved into a one-bedroom across town. Lauren told me he complained about the rent almost immediately. My sister's tone was half practical, half amused. He'll learn, she said. I didn't feel glee at that. I felt only the sober satisfaction that consequences had a way of catching up. Jenna's LinkedIn page quieted, no new posts about fast ascents. Careers, like families, have a way of showing their true shape over time. Some friends drifted away, unsure how to navigate a relationship that had been entangled. Others leaned in. I found that boundaries clarified relationships rather than shrinking them. People who stayed were the ones who respected the choices I made and didn't demand the messy, public drama some people seemed to want. I started saying no more often, not because I wanted to be cruel, but because saying no was how I protected the life I had rebuilt. One Saturday, months after it all began, I took Buddy to the same park. The leaves were turning the same bright colors. A woman with a beagle smiled and asked about Buddy. I felt the old reflex, the urge to share, to be friendly, to make room for people in the steady, accommodating way I'd been taught. I answered, but I kept his name to myself. He's just my best boy, I said, and meant it. It was a small guard, but it was mine. I learned something practical in all of this. Silence is not always submission. Quiet can be a strategy. It can be a way to gather, measure, and then act with precision. I didn't shout my truth from rooftops. I collected facts, made a plan, and executed it. That was how I won, not by making the biggest scene, but by making the right moves. If you're listening and you recognize that numb, quiet place before the decision to act, know that there is a way forward that doesn't demand you lose yourself. You can prepare, you can document, you can set boundaries that protect what matters. It's not always dramatic. Sometimes it's just changing the locks, freezing an account, rewriting a presentation, and refusing to be loud when the right move is to be steady. I still have nights I miss the easy companionship of the life I gave up. The grief doesn't disappear, but it changes shape. It becomes part of the furniture you walk around, not the foundation you build on. My foundation is now different, reinforced with my own hands. If anything good came from this, it's the clarity I found. I know now where my line is drawn. I know my own pace. And I know that when quiet becomes strategy, it can be as powerful as any shout. It's a Saturday morning, crisp and bright in the same way it was the day everything started. The park smells like wet leaves and coffee and the month when the light starts to get honest. I'm walking the same loop, Buddy on his leash, his ears flicking at the same noises, squirrels, a distant dog, the rustle of a stroller. The maples are turning the same riot of orange and red, but when I look around, the world feels quieter in the best way. It's not waiting for a thing to break, it's steady in its own rhythm. A woman with a beagle slows to let our dogs sniff. She has that friendly, easy smile people use to make strangers like them. She bends down, coos at Buddy, and then asks, like most people do, he's beautiful. What's his name? For the first time since that morning when a stranger called him by name, I feel the power of a small secret. I look at Buddy, at the soft dip of his head, and I smile back because I mean it. He's just my best boy, I tell her. I keep his name to myself like I keep the key to the house now, hours and hours alone. It's a tiny thing, but it feels big. It's a boundary that's simple to hold and impossible for anyone else to cross without my invitation. Walking here, I think about Mom and Dad and the way secrets lived in the corners when I was a kid. Mom tried to hold things together by pretending, and Dad's silence was the kind that hurt more than any argument. I promised myself I wouldn't live like that. I learned to listen to the small alarms in my chest and to act before the quiet swallowed me whole. That lesson taught me how to move slowly but deliberately, how to collect facts instead of letting feelings roar, and how to make choices that kept home and work intact. Buddy tugs toward a patch of sun and leans into me. I let him. The park looks the same as it did months ago, but I am not the same. I keep the name of my dog close like a line I drew in the sand and refuse to step over. My pace is mine now, measured, steady, and unhurried. I'm the person who built her life back one careful move at a time. If you've ever had to draw a line to protect your peace, I'd love to hear your story in the comments below. Please subscribe for more, and I'll see you in the next video.